I'm excited. You know why? Because the first time I came across you was I was browsing through YouTube and I saw one of your lectures. I believe it was the Agency of Architecture, which, if I'm not mistaken, is a few years old right now. And then quickly I went in this rabbit hole with a lot of your lectures. And then one thing really stuck out to me. Your ability, you were so eloquent explaining the subject and your ability to simplify it and to relate to what you're saying kind of really stand out. So for me, it was almost like this guy was meant to do this. No, but listen, did you always was that part of the plan as well? Always being able to teach and be the one kind of conveying those ideas and explaining and almost like
No,
a spokesperson for those kind of subject matter.
not at all. I'm gonna tell you something that's totally true that hasn't been said on a podcast before or any lecture. I think I had a speech impediment when I was a kid, and so from kindergarten through eighth grade, I had to go to speech therapy classes because I had a really bad stutter. And through that process, I had to learn how to become a better speaker so that I could get over that speech impediment. And those 9 years of speech pathology got me to a point where I became a really good speaker. And so now if I tell people that, they never believe me. I'm like, no, I'm serious. And the funny thing is if I get really excited, like really excited, I'll stutter a little. But at this point, being 38 years old, I know when it's happening. So I know how to tap back into that speech pathology trick to slow myself down. So part of the reason why I've gotten so good at communicating is because I was so bad at it when I was a kid.
Isn't that incredible? Because immediately my initial reaction was like, this guy is a natural. Look how easy he make it sound, how eloquent how everything's flowing so well, and there you are, you're telling me that something that you had to overcome, and that's almost like everybody's stories, right? Nobody really gets there right away. There's a lot of
Yeah, that was a real
background.
thing. And my parents wanted me to be a lawyer, so there was that part of it too, where they didn't know what a designer was, they didn't know what an architect does. They just knew you're going to be a lawyer. So if you add speech classes plus the speaking that comes with law, then you get someone that knows how to explain things in a legible way. And I've been fortunate enough to utilize that in my practice.
Well, that really stand out to me. So bravo for sure for overcoming that and
Thank
maximizing
you.
the opportunity and you really being able to convey the stories. But the interesting thing you mentioned about your parents wanting to become a lawyer, at what point did you decide like, nah, that's not for me. I'm going to go do something else?
Oh, Yuri, since I was 5 years old, man. There's never been a moment in my life where I did not know that I was going to be an architect. It's just if you grow up in an American black household, rule number one is you do not disagree with your mother. Does not happen. You don't do that. That is the quickest way to get in trouble. So you do what mom says, and then on the side, you follow your passion. And so I'm doing all this stuff on the side while she's trying to get me to be a lawyer, knowing I am not going to do this. I don't enjoy reading enough to do this. And, and then and then it was time for college. When it was time for college, I sent in my own college applications without them knowing what major I selected.
Oh, so you waited all the way to college.
Yeah, yeah. I did it that way. So that's how that happened. So before you know it, here it is. And she's like, wait a minute, you're studying architecture? I was like, yeah. My dad never really cared. My mom is the one who's always like the stickler. My dad just like whatever makes you happy, whatever gets you to stay out of trouble with your mother. I think that's what you should do. Yeah,
As long as mom is happy, we'll be okay.
exactly, exactly.
Hey, I know that. I know the feeling for sure. That's so interesting, though. That's fascinating. But now, I mean, after so many years, you were an
Yeah.
accomplished professional. What does she has to say about that?
Oh, she takes all the credit. she takes she takes all the credit. So she says you wouldn't be such a good speaker if it wasn't for me trying to make you be a lawyer. You wouldn't be so world traveled if I didn't make you do all these different programs. You still owe me for your architecture career. So again, there's no point in arguing. You just say, all right, mom, you give them a thumbs up and then you go on to the next thing.
That's amazing. Isn't that hilarious?
She takes all the credit, but it's really awesome though. She's probably my biggest fan. She comes to all of the openings. She comes to all of the events. I'm just happy to make her proud.
But listen, going through the rabbit hole and learn a little bit more about you, it seems like at the end of the day, it seems like you're having fun. Is that something, is a fair assessment? Like you're having a good time at it?
Oh, absolutely. I think I jokingly tell my friends everything that we design, everything we work towards, is just to make the younger versions of ourselves happy. Like there's that moment when maybe you're a kid and there's something you want, you can't afford it because like you're a kid, how do you buy it? But then when you get older, you buy that thing because you're like, I wanted this when I was younger. I'm gonna buy it now to satisfy that younger version. That's how we treat design. It's how can we make sure that the younger versions of us are so happy with the things that we're doing, and we're always trying to put as much joy as possible into it. So I'm having a blast.
You have spoken about the influence of your family, your roots in the South, and also your upbringing in Chicago, and a lot of your work. So now, as you talk about your younger version of yourself and trying to make that little kid happy, how much of your upbringing, your experiences, and all of those things really come to fruition when you look into your larger body of work, but also project that you want to kind of tack on in the next few years?
Oh man, I think it's the absolute root of everything. Like I think about a lot of the porch work that we've done in the past, and that large trajectory was based off an event that happened when I was 16 years old. It was based off of an unfortunate mistaken identity event with the police that happened on my front porch. Like that's where that came from. I think about some of the other projects we've done with like the chairs and things of that nature, and that's based off of fun things that we did as a kid. So I'm always drawing from personal experience because that's what I'm an expert at. And I think the best way that I can make my family proud is by sharing the things that I hold dear to myself and that they also recognize they hold dear, because you find there's so many other families that have the exact same upbringing, and you find those commonalities, and then when you find those and you stay rooted in those, it allows you to do work that has a more heartfelt approach. And to me, that's the work that you remember. It's not the glitzy, glamorous stuff that makes your eyes twinkle for a hot second, but it's the stuff that really hits you right in the gut. And you think about that, and it takes you back to your childhood, or it takes you back to a moment where you were carefree. And I think we all need to be able to have moments where things are carefree.
Can you recall a moment, one of those moments that for the first time, as you have your practice you're working on, that you realize, yeah, I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to do, and you know what? I'm not only pursuing my dreams, I'm actually good at this.
I do, I do, I do, I do. That is a great question. Okay, I got you. Here's when I knew I'm pretty damn good at this. This is when I knew. So it's the MoMA Reconstruction Show. 2019, we get the email. I'm jumping for joy. I'm like, how did these people find me? I'm so young. I don't know what's going on. Fast forward, the show opens, and when the show opens, there's a group of young black women that walk up to the drawings, and they see nothing but black faces along the wall. And I'm hearing them laugh, and they're taking pictures and selfies with the work. And I'm like, wow, this is pretty crazy. And then one of them goes on Twitter, posts the image, because where I sourced the collage from, she was the photographer of that image. So it's like this extremely meta moment of the person in the picture who took the photo that got collaged back into the MoMA, taking the picture. And the caption at the bottom said, I finally see some colored people in the MoMA, which is a Jay-Z line from one of his albums, Magna Carta, Holy Grail. So when that happens, I'm like, this is literally everything that I've ever tried to do collapsed in one moment. Like, it's my love for hip hop, it's my love for my culture, it's my love for putting people in the front space. It's the Museum of Modern Art in New York, which is a flagship global institution. I was like, oh, I'm kind of good at this. This is what I should be doing. This is like one of the best moments that I've had. And like it was absolutely incredible.
That's fascinating to hear the excitement. I can see you really remember those emotions coming through you right now, and that's the interesting thing too, because those emotions happen so little. Not often you have those moments to really, look at yourself and be super excited and proud of you done it. And often enough, I feel a lot of designers or creative people is always chasing that moment again. Is always chasing that great hit or that breakthrough that designer is going to put you on the top again. Every time you're tackling a new project, is that what you're chasing? I mean, you always try to go back to that 2019 exhibition, that moment.
Because that was a one-off moment. I don't know if I'll be able to tackle that one again. Every time we get a new project, I'm always trying to find new ways to express joy. That's the thing we're always chasing. We're always chasing, how do we make people happy, and how do we make them see themselves in the work? Because that's something that we can attain. I don't think I'll ever be able to get that feeling back of seeing that moment in the museum because that was just so serendipitous. But we can absolutely replicate how to make people feel happy. And so everything we've done since then, I get so many random text messages or Instagram notes from people saying, "Oh my God, I love this thing so much. I had so much fun. It was so vibrant. My kids loved it. We loved it." I'm like, okay, then we were successful. We did what we w're supposed to.
Do you feel like sometimes not only in architecture but our world, everything is taken too seriously? There
Hell yeah.
yeah.
Oh my God, like architecture design is like one of the most serious fields that you can be in. Like everything like has to be all black or all white. And it's like you're not allowed to have color. You're not allowed to design with color. When it's time to build a thing, it has to be so rigid. Like there's just so many things that we remove. But then when you go to somebody's private home, it's like the most colorful place ever. And it's like, so what is it? Is this just a facade to make everybody else happy? Like, what is it? Um, and I think if we have more people who embraced the youth of it all, we have so much more vibrant and colorful work out in the world, which I think is what we need.
That's an interesting thing because you also teach. So you have the
Yep.
opportunity to be with this young next generation of designers. And I was actually in Brazil recently, and I had a conversation with the students at the University of São Paulo, the FAUT, which the build itself was built by Villanova Artigas, who the build itself is just a school of architecture per se. As soon as you walk in, it's just amazing. And the conversation there, and maybe has something to do with what we're just talking about, how everything is so serious, is that they're not taught how to be spontaneous. They're not taught how to engage different exercise in their minds in different ways. There's very rigid in the way you upbring into the curriculum. Do you think that's
Hmm.
something just to say why we're still kind of stuck on the vortex of doing kind of not doing the same thing, but not really breaking through the opportunity to be more colorful, more spontaneous, more interesting, even more provocative?
Well, I think one, you're absolutely right. Like you are absolutely right, and that's not just in São Paulo. That's across the globe. I mean, it's in Miami, it's in New York, it's in Italy, it's all over the place. And I think that's because students imitate what they see. And if they see things that are successful a certain way, and you want to be successful, you copy it. So if everything that is successful is a very rigid and formalistic approach, then you inevitably do the same thing. And so when you have more faculty, when you have more practitioners, when you have more professionals who are doing a colorful approach, then that starts to seep into academia. And that starts to be a thing that students start to do. So I think it's actually pretty great that this younger generation of architects and designers are embracing that sort of colorful approach because you're starting to see it. But it's very, 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 very slight at like the first year, second year level. But as long as we have this sort of aesthetic of high design is extremely orthogonal, is extremely planner, then you won't get the type of impact that we're trying to get. So I think it'll happen eventually. But I too am concerned about it. I think the biggest thing is in a place like the U.S., for example, there's so many laws and it's so litigious, and that you can be sued for anything that there's so much rigidity in the work to prevent liability. It's like, well, you can do this really cool thing, but you might get sued. You can do this really awesome thing, but somebody might sue you. And we don't want you to get sued. So here's how we do the things so that you don't get sued.
Yeah, the pushing the boundaries is where there's a risk there, right? And it takes some sort of I don't know, a rebel,
Yes.
to go to do that. But you
Yes.
talk a lot about identity in architecture. That's something that you're always expressing. And for the young, and a lot of times people like to talk about their architecture mission and philosophy and all of those things. But when you are in your early 20s, you don't really know who you are completely. You're still struggling to find out. So for you, at what point did you were able to understand not only who you are as a profession, but also as an artist? What age was that for you?
Oh man, that wasn't until I was like 30. If I'm being totally honest with you, I did not understand that before. When I graduated from undergrad, I was not sure yet who I was or what kind of work I enjoyed doing. When I moved to South Africa, I wasn't sure yet. When I went to graduate school, I still didn't know. It wasn't until I kept getting rejected from fellowships and awards and grants trying to stay relevant. So whatever the topic of architecture and design was at that time, I was like, all right, I can figure this out. I'll do that. So at first it was parametricism. I was like, I can figure this out. I'm smart enough. I can do this, and then boom, I'll get an award for it. Wrong. It's like, oh, this other thing, I can figure that out. Wrong. And then at a certain point, I said, well, I have to talk about what I know. I know porches. I know Southern Black culture. I know Chicago because this is my life. Like I know what it's like to live in a neighborhood that isn't very safe, but also grow up in a family that's upper middle class. I know what it's like to go to very fancy schools, but take a bus that takes you an hour and 30 minutes to get there. Like there are always these dualities. I'm like, why don't I just talk about what I know? And the fear was, well, what if architecture doesn't care? What if I know this and design world doesn't care? What if they're like, oh, that's adorable. Take it over there. We don't want to hear about that. Take it to the humanities. Take it to those other courses. Get it out of architecture. We don't care about those stories. And I applied for a Graham Foundation grant in 2017 about that research, and I got it. And when I got it, I said, oh, so there is legitimacy in me just being myself. There is legitimacy in me just talking from a perspective that I am an expert in. And then boom, everything took off from there. So in 2017, I was 31, turning 32. That's how long it took me to figure it out.
Yeah, it's incredible. And since then, you seems to be enjoying a tremendous success. Not only a lot of accolades, you have received it as well, and awards and opportunities, but also with projects. But much of your work is also engaged in community spaces, right?
Yep.
And you're really exploring that idea, what it's like to live in be a community on those environments. How do you approach community environment in projects like this? When you look at it, it really depends what the city that you're thinking about, the community on that region, because that can vary tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
When you start in those projects, what are the first step you want to look into?
Oh man, the first step is just getting on the ground and going to shake some hands and meeting people. Because you will learn so much more from the people that live there than you will from any type of GIS mapping or census data or surveys. People don't like filling those things out and being honest because they don't know what you're going to do with that data. But if you walk up to somebody and say you want to have a coffee, you want to have a chat, they'll give you all the answers that you want. And so that's always been our approach. It's we got to go talk to people. And then once you talk to people, listen and take their ideas serious and take their comments serious because they are the experts. And I think we get into this mindset of I'm the architect, I'm the expert, you're the resident, you're not the expert, when that's not the case. So we don't take that approach. Anytime we go to a new community, listening, 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 listening. And then once we've done weeks, sometimes even months of listening, then we start, which is typically not the process that most people go with because that makes the project take a very long time. But we find that makes the project better. So it's not just a money grab about how can I get as many fees as possible. It's how can I actually work with the constituents that matter and then empower them to now make their own decisions later.
Can you give an example of one of those experiences that you actually had the opportunity to sit down with someone that you just learned something that you weren't expected about the space?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So there's a project that we did in a city called Delray Beach, Florida. And in Delray Beach, there's this amazing nonprofit called Thrive Delray, led by two incredible women, Kristen Cox and Sarah Selzer. And they were like, Germane, we have this amazing land, we have this amazing community, and we're just trying to do whatever we can to make it better. What can you come up with? And so I'm like, what do you mean? That's a very just like blunt thing to come up with. And they're like, well, what do you need to do first? I'm like, well, can we go talk to some of the elders in the neighborhood so I can hear their stories? And when you get there, you start learning about this community of people that one weren't allowed on the other side of the train tracks. Like they legally could not go to the other side of town, or they had certain curfews, or their land was taken. And you're like, wow, this is the kind of stuff I only read about in books. But to hear these real stories from real people who are still alive, like that's incredible. And so after hearing all of that, I was like, oh, Sarah, I'm not going to provide anything. I'm like, it sounds to me like you all just need a way to get your stories out because these stories are important. And so that's how we came up with this idea for the porch stories that we would go around sitting on front porches and recording people telling us like recording that oral history. So what started as a design prompt for me ended up not being any design at all. It's like, we should not do that. Like, that's not what we should do. Whereas maybe younger me would have said, oh, okay, here's a neighborhood. Here's what they need. I can solve the problems. But the mature version of me learned you can't just go solve problems with design. You have to start with a listening session. And ever since then, we ended up doing this thing called the pop-up porch for them. So that we took this idea of them telling the stories from the porch, and then we made it mobile. So now the porch can go anywhere, and you can tell those stories anywhere. And like that's how that happened. So I think that's one of my favorite projects, and that's kind of how that happened.
That's beautiful. I love that. I'm going to share a little bit of my perspective, and you, because you're in Miami, you can give me a better look at what's going on. I remember visiting Miami. I mean, I'm in Miami quite often, but I remember visiting Miami for the first time in Art Basel, early 2000s, like very early on. So very different way it is today. And I remember Wynwood, what it used to be, and then I suddenly became this hot, popular, trendy, hot place with all those luxury retail and all those things. But then going back and hear from some of the folks that used to live there, how they were very much pushed out of the neighborhood because developers were coming in and putting big high rises. They couldn't maintain rent or mortgage and all those things. And that has been changing the cities. And a lot of times they use art as a way to promote the neighborhood, but we're very much forgetting about the people that made the neighborhood what he was. Now you're in Miami, and I think that has happened quite a bit. Miami, probably more than most cities in the United States. What are your point of view regarding to that? How much has it changed for you? Do you think, on the bigger scale, things are getting better, or still a big problem to deal with?
Oh man, I don't know. So to the listeners, I was nodding my head very vigorously because everything that Yuri said is absolutely right. And that Wynwood was a completely different place when I moved here 11 years ago. When I moved here in February of 2013, you did not have to pay for parking. There were art walks every second Saturday. There were tons of really cool dive bars and art galleries. Maybe within 4 years, half of those were gone. And it was now Ducati and these very luxury apartment complexes. And now even the Ducati store is gone. It's becoming a new high rise that's there. The place is completely unrecognizable if you compare 2011 to 2024. And one of the biggest things that I found is that not only is it predatory from the developer standpoint of I'll give you all of this stuff for free or very cheap, make it popular, now get out. But the other side of that is what is the responsibility of the artist to be able to say, well, instead of you giving me this month to month rent or this whatever rent, maybe we need like a 15-year lease. So that way, the moment this place gets popular, you can't just push me out. Right now, the catch is legal fees are expensive. As I mentioned earlier, you can get sued for everything in the U.S.
Yeah.
So part of this is how do you get adequate representation to advocate on your behalf? Because how fair is it for you to make a space extremely popular and then get kicked out afterwards? Because Wynwood was not a safe space to people who were foreigners. And I want to emphasize that. If you were a foreigner, it wasn't safe. If you were from Wynwood or if you were Puerto Rican, because it was a predominantly Puerto Rican neighborhood, it was totally safe to them. It's like this is our neighborhood, this is our enclave.
That's
We're
home.
supposed to be here. Exactly. Right. And that goes into that word of safety and who uses it and how it can be manipulated. It was home for them, so perfectly safe. But if you were not from that neighborhood, you might have thought it wasn't safe at all. And so there's these moments where you sort of you fight internally. I need the space. It's super cheap. I can utilize it. But then now, am I complicit? Am I now helping in a development that will eventually push me out? And that's where there's like these different difficult moral questions that a person has to ask. And it's not unique to just Miami. It's just on a very big scale in Miami because of things like Art Basel.
Yeah, I was remember keeping reading about a lot of articles about how Wynwood is the hot place and how exciting the new
Mm-hmm.
neighborhood used to be dangerous. Now it's great, but no mention about as you mentioned, the citizens, the people that used to call that home.
Yep.
They did not benefit at all of any of that transformation. They were pushed out. And then I heard a little bit about Lady Haiti. Apparently, is the next thing that people want to spend money on and develop. And then it becomes like the city doesn't belong to the people from the city anymore.
Thank you. That is exactly what it is. And there's this unfortunate sort of split that's happening between those various income levels to where if you don't have a lot of money, most likely you're a renter. And Florida is not rent controlled. A landlord can change whatever they want as the year, as the month goes, as long as they give 30 or 60 days notice. And so you have these neighborhoods that were thriving, like Little Haiti, like Liberty City, but people are deciding, oh, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and take all that property because you're just a renter. I'll give an offer to your landlord that'll absolutely take it. And now where are you supposed to move to? Which is how Miami has gotten so unaffordable. And it's unfortunate that that's happened. I've watched this place completely transform over a decade from a place that I thought was vibrant and exciting and youthful to a place right now that just seems very financially inaccessible.
Clearly, the solution to the problem is not as simple as we like to be. There's a lot in
Hmm.
play. But if you were to say, if we were to move towards better, no, move forward in a better way, what would it be perhaps a couple of options that we should do or we should try to tackle to improve the situation to maybe, balance the scale a little bit off a little bit more for the residents?
Oh, that's easy. That's affordable housing. That's it. If you give us affordable housing in Miami that allows people to have discretionary income, and with that discretionary income, they can do a bunch of other things. Miami is so expensive for housing. It is so expensive. The average income, I think, last couple of years was maybe less than $40,000 a year. Meanwhile, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment is over $2,000 a month.
Mm.
So imagine spending more than half of your income on your rent. What do you have left? Like there's nothing left. So there's this the lack of affordable housing is alarming in this place. And it's crazy because you see so many new housing complexes being built that you have to wonder like who's living in these units because
Who can
people
afford
literally
that,
yeah
right?
who can
All those,
afford
yeah.
them like you don't there's I've just moved a few months ago and I was looking for a new place and just to find a one bedroom the cheapest place I could find was $2,800. I was like, this is insane. There's no way I'm spending that. And then I had friends who were like, come live in my building. I'm like, all right, how much is one bedroom in your building? $3,500. I'm like, why would I spend $3,500 on a one bedroom apartment? That's a house. That
Yeah.
is that is a large house. Why would I ever do that? But these are the kind of things that people are asking for. And then on top of that, they're saying, show me proof of three months of income. Show me proof of your salary that you can afford this. Pay this application fee. Pay this first month's deposit and this last month's deposit. So by the time you're done, you're paying $9,000, $10,000 up front to go live in an apartment that you don't even know. Like how can a person afford that in Miami?
Yeah, it's definitely a problem that we see in Miami, but we also see in many different places. I am now in Austin, Texas, and in one of those cities as well that really
Mm,
boom, they really grow, and you can see a lot of problems. And homeless has become a big problem, not only here, but everywhere else when
hmm.
it comes to dealing with that. And that goes back to a little bit of the concept of hostile architecture that I also has been reading a little bit about it. And I want to kind of hear your thoughts on that. What do you think about public spaces making it unavailable for people that don't have shelter and housing to be able to rest or sit for a second or being able to I don't know, spend the night or whatever it is. But it has been increasingly become more popular approach around many cities.
I mean, I absolutely just hate it. I mean, I think the militarization of public space is insane. The lack of public bathrooms, the lack of public resting spaces. I hate when I go to cities and the benches have the little arm bars in between because to a novice, they're like, oh, look, I can rest my arms here. When in reality, it's that a person can't lay across it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's literally all it's for, right? But then it's the same thing in airports now. Like they're doing the thing. Like if you're in an airport overnight, you lay on the floor because even the seats they have these armrests and you can't go across it. And like I get the idea behind SEPTED, and SEPTED is what they call in the states the hostile architecture stuff. They have quote unquote good intentions. We want to make you safe. We want to have visibility. We want to make sure that you can be moving around through the city and not have to worry about anything. But with everything that has good intentions, there's always some sort of collateral damage. And the collateral damage has been our most vulnerable population, and that's our unhoused. That's our mentally ill. That's our under resourced. And it's the same thing. And the crazy thing I learned being an adult is how we define homelessness. You might assume that a person is only homeless if they haven't been in a place for years, or if they look a certain way, or if they're dirty, or if they are standing on a street corner, like the way it's romanticized. When in reality, homelessness just means when the day is over, you don't have anywhere to go. So there's a lot of people who go at the end of their day, they sleep in their car or they sleep on a friend's couch. These are technically unhoused people, even though to the world they seem perfectly functional. It's like, no, that person is homeless. They don't have a resident that they can actually call their own. And so I think it's just extremely disheartening the way that we approach this issue. And I'm very fortunate to have a bunch of colleagues that really take this matter very serious, and they do things like provide healthcare, provide legal expertise because it's so necessary. If we're not doing this for our most vulnerable population, what are we doing? And that goes back to those earlier conversations I mentioned about trying to bring joy into the work because you need to in a world like this.
Yeah, because perhaps you might have a better understanding about the subject than I do. Have you seen examples of a successful approach to deal with that? Not only the homeless issues, but also, public bathroom being able to include the city a little bit more for the citizens in different countries or cities that are taking more a novelty approach that seems to be working.
I see it outside of the U.S. all the time. I mean, I'm very blessed and fortunate to get to live in other countries and go visit other places. And I'm always amazed by how immaculate their public amenities are, how accessible their public amenities are. It's like, oh, you all understand that you're allowed to use the restroom in public space. Like that should be an absolute right. Meanwhile, in the States, the first thing we do is close down our public facilities because we're worried about someone that might sleep there or take a shower inside of it. And it's like, why are these bad things? These are not bad things. The group I mentioned in Delray Beach, Thrive, one of the big conferences we had once was about planting some trees, and specifically fruit trees, because Miami has an amazing climate to grow mango and bananas and things like that, right? All things that bear fruit that an unhoused person can eat because they deserve to eat. And some of the residents literally said, "Oh, I don't want those kind of trees because what if they eat off them?" To which we were all like, "Isn't that the point? Like, literally, isn't that the point that if a person can take an avocado off of a tree, that allows them to have some sort of sustenance? Why is that a bad thing?" And so, trying to convince them and eventually successfully convincing them, we planted like 60 trees that are all different type of fruit, different types of mango, different type of avocado in this area of Delray Beach that will eventually bear fruit, which will help the unhoused population there. And somebody might say that's insignificant, but it's better than nothing.
No, for sure. It's better than that. When you talk to your students, do you see them sharing the same motivation, the same passion about those issues? I know environment has something big for many, many years now, but now there's a lot of more other subjects that people are more interested in and exploring through design and architecture. Do you see the enthusiasm and they're eager to tackle themselves?
Oh, absolutely. This Generation Z, they're nothing but activists. I don't even know if I don't think they're designers. I think they're just activists. Like everything they do is about how can I make the world a better place? And I'm like, who taught you all this stuff? Like the world is not kind. And it's always interesting to me, like you see protests and stuff happening all over the place. It's Gen Z, like it's them.
Mhm.
So my students come in far braver than I was when I was a student. Like they question their professors. I would have never thought to do that. My first tell me the project sucks. Like, okay, what do I change? Whereas now they're like, well, why? Why do you explain to me why you think it's bad? And then next thing you know, you have to justify it. And it's like, wow, I didn't realize I had to articulate this for you. I expected you to just understand the power dynamics, but you realize like that reinforces unfortunate structures. And the good professors alter their approach and accept that. The bad professors continue to try to run with an iron fist. But I think these new students, like I'm incredibly inspired by them all the time, by the way that they put their family first, they put their own happiness first, and they're like, architecture is not going anywhere. But if I'm not happy, how am I supposed to be productive? Which is not something that we typically teach in the American system.
Yeah. And, having the opportunity to talk to some students in Sao Paulo recently, and I shared the same sentiment. They were like, we're ready to fight.
Yes, yes, it's a
uh,
thing.
we're not happy. We don't like how things are moving forward, and they want to be part of the workforce, and they're trying to figure it out, like how they can participate and still have being, not being a kid anymore and being independent and being growing up. But they don't want to give up their principles and their ideas. So I think it will be very interesting to see for sure the next 10 to 15 years what's going to be the leading force in design and architecture and how that will change our mentality and how we approach it and how we see it as well for the general public who's just from outside looking in.
Yeah, I think from what I'm seeing, it's so much rooted in that personal identity politics, and so many students are just putting themselves in their work. Like, no, I am interested in gender politics. I'm only going to design things from the lens of a gender activist. I'm interested in racial politics. I am only going to design from this lens, which historically has only happened in art. It has not happened in design and architecture. So it's interesting to see this now shift into architecture and design because we've always been, we don't deal with world issues and social issues over here. We just make spaces. That's it. And the world's like, wrong. Here's what's been happening in spaces you've all designed. And these young people get that. And they're absolutely running with that. And they're making work that makes them happy, even if it doesn't subscribe to the traditional way that we look at architecture and design.
Well, we
I'm
do
here
live in
for
a
it.
yeah, and we do live in a world right now that social media make them more available so people can see it and understand it. But when you look at the media, to the press, some to the large publications who are covering design and architecture, do you feel that subject matter and those topics are present? or because that's a big part as well, the part of informing the community.
I think it's not as much as it should be. Like every now and then you get a publication that might run a project or two, and that happens, but they're still their core audience, and their core audience are of a different generation that cares about not subscribing politics and identity to work, just keeping those things completely separate. But I think because, as you mentioned, social media is becoming so popular, TikTok is so popular, Instagram is so popular, Twitter is so popular, or X, whatever they call it. Because these things are so popular, students are using these platforms to now be their own media. It's like, I'm going to build my own social media platform. I'm going to get 100,000 followers to then show my own type of political agenda. And I think it's actually being successful because I'm seeing it across all platforms. Like one of those is called Dark Matter University. And I'm seeing these people who are literally just saying, no, 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 we want to protest this. We want to protest that. We want more opportunities. And here's how we're going to design through those things. And I find that fascinating. And because it forces the media to either acknowledge it or perish. Unfortunately, a lot of them are beginning to perish.
No, 100%. Yeah, no, it's an exciting time to have those conversations to understand it, because as much as we think we're talking about the U.S. or a specific city, we're just using Miami as an example. I think it's so much of a global situation for many, many
Absolutely.
cities, different ethnic cities, backgrounds. It's all over the world. I think we're all facing going through the same, same moment for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's actually what makes it more impactful because that camaraderie is international. Like there's students in Rome that are also dealing with a housing crisis. There are students in Germany that are also dealing with racial politics. There are students in France that are dealing with the exact same thing. So when someone in Miami, Florida makes a comment, you look at the chat that's underneath it, it's a global audience that's saying, yes, it's the same thing here. And I think that solidarity is encouraging as a way forward and being able to understand the power of architecture and design.
Jermaine, I actually want to go back and talk more a little bit about you now for a few more minutes before we wrap
Sure.
this up. And I think after we went through this very, global visit of the architecture, status in the world, and he slightly talk about some subjects and topics. Who are the artists or thinkers or architects or movements that kind of have profoundly influenced your approach in you?
I think some of the biggest influences that I've had architecturally are actually some of my professors. I had this amazing professor named Jennifer Bonner when I was in grad school, another professor named Barbara Bester when I was in grad school. And the two of them are probably some of the biggest influences I've had because they allowed me to just think freely. It was like, don't worry about codes, don't worry about being sued. I know I said that a million times, but it's like, just imagine, right? How can you imagine? How can you bring color into your project? And if you look at both of their practices, they're extremely colorful, like extremely colorful. And it took that to really get me out of my box. But then there's also social movement. So my grandmother and grandfather are from the South, and I've had conversations with them about what it meant to be sharecroppers and what it meant to having to keep everything in your home because you had no idea when it would be taken from you. Like I used to always wonder as a kid, like, are we hoarders? Like, why do y'all keep so much stuff? Like, can we get rid of these things? You haven't touched that box in 8 years. Get rid of it. And like, you never know when I'll need it. And it's like, well, you'll never need it. Like, just please throw it in the trash. But then you get older, you get away from it, you realize, oh, you worked really hard for that.
Yeah.
It took a long time for you to get to this point economically. This is actually proof of your tenacity, and you can't get rid of that. You can't throw that in the trash. That it becomes a living archive of their lives. And so whenever we design stuff, we tap back into that archive. So like that's the biggest movement that's ever affected me. It's just knowing the hurdles that people of color have to deal with in this country, whether that be an Asian American or a Mexican American, Puerto Rican American, Black American. Just like there's so much stuff people have to overcome. These things deserve to be applauded and recognized. And that's all we try to do. Like, how do we promote these stories? I don't need to talk about buildings. Like I jokingly tell people, I don't care about buildings. They're like, but you're an architect. How do you not care about buildings? I'm like, because they're not that interesting to me, man. Like it's a building. Cool. But what happens in the building? What are the rituals of those spaces? How do you and your brother eat food? How do you and your abuela watch TV? How do you and your cousin do this other thing in the space that we've crafted for you? And for me, that's the exciting stuff. And that's more anthropological than anything, but I find that fascinating. And being the person that can create those type of memories, like that's a powerful position to be in.
Absolutely. You talk a lot about rituals, but I think it's a fascinating word, not used very often, but with a beautiful connotation as well. And kind of going back to that, can you describe it like a typical day in your life in terms of work or pleasure? What do you usually you do for fun? What are your rituals that you treasure the most in
Yeah,
your life that you want to keep doing?
yeah. Gotcha. So there's two things I have to do that if I don't do them, I'm not going to be a very kind person. I'm just going to be brooding all the time. One of those is I love the sauna, man. Like whoever invented the sauna is like, that's my favorite person in the world. You'll catch me in the sauna for like 20, 25 minutes straight, just sitting there meditating. Like, let's get all the toxins out. Let's just breathe and just be quiet in this moment.
Beautiful.
I do like today. I'm gonna go to the sauna. Like that is one of my things. The other thing is basketball. Like I'm a huge basketball fanatic. So playing basketball is something that allows me to become a better teammate, become a better communicator, become a better leader, which are all things that I bring into the practice because you learn these skills over there, and it's a great stress reliever. So for me, those are two things that I have to do. If I go a week without either one of those, I'm going to be drained. I'm going to be unpleasant. I'm not going to be smiling. I'm going to be just annoyed all the time. And like my colleagues will tell me, like, you haven't played basketball this week, have you? I'm like, no, I haven't. They're like, please go to the gym or
Yeah,
something.
yeah. Get out of here.
Yes,
Get out of here.
yes.
Are you well, that's a controversial question, but are you a Bulls or a Heat fan?
Bulls, man, this is not controversial at all. This is Chicago all day, Yuri. That's how this works. I just live here. I am a
Ah,
Chicago Bulls fan.
that's
Yes,
amazing.
yes.
That's amazing. Jermaine, before I let you go, there's three questions that I ask everybody who comes here on the show.
Okay,
One, a book. We wanted to recommend as a book to read. It can be something that you
okay,
read recently or a favorite book. It's up to you. Number two, something to watch. A movie, a
okay.
TV show, a documentary. And number three, a guest. Who should we invite next to be here on the show with us?
Okay, so to your first one, which was first question, remind me the first question again.
A book.
Okay, a book, Spatializing Blackness by Rashad Shabazz.
Okay.
Fantastic book, incredible book. Based in Chicago, talks about race, space, all these things collapsing together, plus housing. Amazing text. Second thing was TV show
Yeah, one movie. Yeah.
or a movie. I'm going to tell you my favorite movie. Don't laugh, but it is a movie that I can watch 100 times in a row because I've seen it so many times. It's got me through. It's called Bloodsport. It's from like
Yeah.
1982 with John Claude Van Damme. It's not a good movie, but I love that movie.
You kidding? I grew up in all Jean-Claude Van Damme films, all of it. It
That
was
is my
like,
movie.
yeah. See, a funny thing, quick story. I live in LA for many, many years, and we see
Yeah,
celebrities everywhere, all the time. I never really got like Star Trek or anything like this. I saw Jean-Claude once
yeah.
at the pool at the Beverly Hills Hotel. That one, or I think it was the only moment that I look at him like,
The muscles from
John,
Brussels.
you
That's
know,
the
I was
man.
like, it's him doing the
Yeah.
splits and all of those things. The memory, everything came back. It was such a big part of my childhood
Yep.
that immediately reconnect, going back and reconnect with that young self of mine, thinking I'm gonna go and fight and and go to these tournaments and all of those things, be the first Brazilian out there.
Exactly. That is my movie. I always have two screens up when I do work. If I'm
Uh,
like really in the zone, Bloodsport will be on one screen and the other screen will be me working. And I'm just
uh,
listening. I know the whole movie at the back of my head.
so we have to credit your mom and Bloodsport for all
All of my
accomplishments
success.
and the
Absolutely.
success. There you go.
Thank you, John
Okay.
Claude Van Damme. I appreciate you and everything you stand for. Yeah. And then a person to add. I would say that mentor I mentioned, Jennifer Bonner,
Jennifer.
an incredible architect, has a crazy story from working with prison reform people in rural Alabama to like being a pioneer in the U.S. of cross-laminated timber architecture and design, like an absolute force. That's who I would say would be an amazing guest. This has been fun as hell. This has been
Hey,
extremely fun.
Mitchell, I was about to say, I mean, we've been doing this for a little bit over the 45 minutes, and it's been a lot of fun. I want
Yeah.
to thank you for taking the time and joining me today. I'm walking away with so many great memories and things to look into to study a little bit more. It's part of a personal growth as well. I hope a lot of people are going to walk away who's listening and watching us with information. But before you go, do me a favor, plug in your website or Instagram so people know how to find you and get more familiar with your work.
Cool. So the Instagram is Germane.Barnes, Germane dot Barnes, Barnes. So that's the IG handle, first name and last name. The website is the first name, last name too. Try to make it simple, GermaneBarnes.com. Try to make the stuff as simple as possible. If you're looking for me, you'll find me in Miami at the University of Miami, where I teach as the director of the graduate program and a tenured professor. Or you'll catch me in Germany with DDoS doing a bunch of stuff with some really cool people in East Germany. Try to find me. I'm Waldo.
Amazing. Germane, you're the man. I appreciate it. Have a fantastic day. Thanks again.
Thanks, buddy. This was a blast. I appreciate this.